Okay, we can get started. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. So we're gonna, as we did last time, we're gonna continue building on what we did on the previous session. So in the previous session that we did, our goal there was basically to get OpenIAM connected to Active Directory, and we showed how we can deploy the connector, and we can define a managed system to be able to do that integration. So we're going to build on that today, and we're going to basically start, to introduce how we can provision users and using OpenIAM. It will be using Active Directory as our target, but the concepts that we talk about here will apply to any application that we can integrate with. So in terms of format, we're going to have like a basic overview of what user provisioning means and how OpenIAM deals with it. We'll then do like a small exercise where we we'll set up the integration and talk about really what's involved in kind of being able to push those attributes into Active Directory. And then we'll take a look at the access control model, and and then we'll wrap it up by creating a role and how we can provision based on a role. And again, this will again be creating the foundation for what we do next time, which is going to be to kind of tie it all together to do a full end-to-end joiners, movers, leavers process. Okay. So when we talk about what it means to be able to provision users, right? Or really to be able to provision in general. And what it really is about it is the ability to be able to create accounts in one or more applications that are in your, in your corporate landscape. So this is, creating your account, pushing out your appropriate user profile information, and the entitlements that may also go with it. And what I mean, and the reason it's important is because that information kind of varies. Like, so for example, if we look at, a Active Directory schema, or if we look at an LDAP schema, there are quite a few attributes that we can define. And there's flexibility where we can also customize them. But on the other hand, if we were to say, provision an account into say AWS or Salesforce, those attributes are much more limited and very specific to what those specific services need, right? So the focus is a little bit different. Okay. So the other part is, besides being able to create accounts, is we also want to be able to modify them, right? So and modification could be related to a variety of things. It could be the result of job changes, like your job title changes, you move to a different department, different location, or it could even be life changes. Somebody gets married and changes their name, and you want that reflected in your corporate world, right? So those are, and the last part is to be able to terminate users, to be able to deprovision access. And there are variations, in between these all use cases, which we can talk about when we look at the joiners, movers, leavers process, right? But this is really what we're trying to basically automate. We're trying to, and so the first step to do that is to define the integration to be able to enable this, right? The other thing is sometimes there's some confusion about the words that we use, like to be able to, when we use synchronization last time, we're using the word to be able to provision today. So a simple way of looking at it is that synchronization is a one-way process, and it's usually about pulling information from somewhere. It could be your source system, it could be from Active Directory into OpenIAM. You're going to be using the connectors for it, but you're still pulling it into OpenIAM. When we talk about provisioning data, it's about taking data from OpenIAM and pushing it down to your target application. In this case, it's going to be AD, but it could be, like I said, it could be AWS, it could be a Linux box, a database server. It doesn't really matter, right? So the flow is going in the opposite direction in each one of these. Okay. So let's take a look at a little bit more in terms of how this whole the flow is going to work, right? So when we look at this, so our requests or the initiation of the data can come from a number of places. It could be a person on the UI, right? It could be an admin, for example, creating an account. It could be self-registration activity. Those are all UI related actions. It could be somebody using the API, which conceptually for OpenIAM is the same thing, because all of those UI operations are going through the API layer anyway. We could also have an integration with our source system right through the synchronization process. So data comes in from HR and we pull data from there, but it ends up in the service layer and then it gets persisted into the OpenIAM database. And then from there, it's basically being handed off to a service within that stack, which just basically is focused on being able to provision. And that service, what it does is basically it looks at the request and it figures out which systems are going to be affected, right? So and that could happen, from a variety of conditions. It could be so the rules that we define it, which look at things like my job title, my location, and later on we'll talk about this, and this is going to be in the whole, category of birthright access. Or the request may actually specify which systems you may need. Like say this was through a request approval mechanism and somebody said, I want this group membership, right? So in that case, there's nothing to really determine. But it's this service that kind of is like the broker to figure out, which systems does someone need and what entitlements do they need within those systems. And then based on that, it's going to publish a message on the message bus, which the connectors will pick up. Now, before that, I left out one step that when it's determining which applications are affected, it also needs to create a packet of data, which is to tell the connector what it should be writing, right? So the connectors actually have no business logic in them whatsoever. They're really meant to be very agnostic of the business part. That all should be computed on the OpenIAM side, on the core services, right? So for example, like what does your name, your identity look like? What OU do you belong to? What, your supervisors and department locations, all those things which need to be kind of calculated. They're all going to be done in that service which handles the whole user, to be able to provision and deprovision. And once we calculate that, then we send it off to the connectors. Okay. The process which is calculating all those attributes, that's what we call our policy map, right? And that's going to be a key part of what we talk about today. And also, as we go through this, if you have any questions, feel free to post your questions. I'd be happy to answer them as we go. I know some of these concepts, especially if you're a little bit new to the IAM space, maybe not so easy. And also, every product and OpenIAM is no different, has its own twist on how we look at the world, right? Okay, so kind of shifting gears a little bit, and this is kind of setting the stage for what we're going to do next, is taking a look at the managed system, right? So last time we created a managed system for Active Directory. We connected to OpenIAM, and so if you remember what I said was the managed system represents a configuration to a specific instance of that application, right? So if the connector is a type of application, like say AD or Linux or AWS, then the managed system represents a configuration to point to a tenant or an instance, right? So in this way, there can be many managed systems, but each one of those tenants can have their own unique ways that they need to be managed, right? So they may have different naming rules. They may have different criteria that need to be handled. So that piece is actually handled by the policy map. It's one of the things that we'll look at when we look at the UI for a managed system. It has a few things that go with it. It's got the main part, the screen that we looked at last time, which is how we connect to the application. It's got a policy map which defines for each type of object, meaning like a user, group, role, the rules to be able to provision those objects, right? And then there's a reconciliation screen, right? And which we will look at a little bit down the road. Okay. So let's jump out of this and look at our Active Directory connection. So let's log in here. Okay, so let's go to our managed system. And so you'll see that now there are two mana system entries. One is I just wanted to make sure that everything is working, and then the second case is for our webinar that we're doing. So, and this is actually a valid configuration. Sometimes and there is a case where you may need to do this, especially if a given application may have multiple identities. Like, say, for example, we need to represent normal users and admin accounts, right? How we can do that. So to be able to represent the related accounts. But let's I'm just going to create another tab here while we do this, so that we can easily go through this. I want to have a reference point where I can work without having to make mistakes, during this process. So if you look at this configuration, so we did our managed system, right? Like we did last time. It's connected, it's healthy, but it really doesn't have any real information in here besides how to connect. So the next part really is to go to our policy map. And here the map is blank. So if we come here and say add, it's going to say, well, what kind of map do you want? And in this case, do you want to be able to provision users, groups, or computer objects? Users and groups you'll see in a number of systems. Computer objects are going to be pretty much, more on the unique side to AD, or systems which are kind of related to, kind of having more of a network focus as well, right? So, and again, everything we do here is going to apply to all of them. So we're not going to go create a map for all three, but just know that you can extend this concept forward. So let's say we create a user, and now just give this thing a name, right? And this is going to be our primary map. And so here we want to build out a mapping. And the mapping is, these are really all the, so attribute name are all my fields within AD, and policies are all my rules to be able to get the data that I want, right? So first thing is, let's set the user, and the attribute name is going to be same account name, and it's going to be a policy, and so this is my script, and data type is going to be a string, and there's no default value. So let's just save this so we can kind of create a structure here. Okay, and at this point we can now just keep building this out, right? And so there are a few attributes that we care about, and so is one small mistake here. So this attribute is a little bit different. It's a principal. And so we need to identify that a little bit differently. So the principal attribute, that's kind of like your primary key. So we need to kind of, be able to tag that. All your other attributes can be perfectly, okay. So let's say, for example, we, let's just pick a few. See, we have given name. And again, now, difference between policy and undefault IDM. Policy means that your values are going to be coming from a Groovy script, right? Your rules to generate these. Default IDM is you're going to take a predefined attribute that's already in OpenIAM that you're going to pick over. For the most part, we tend to use the policies for the Groovy scripts in our own projects, just because it gives us a much more flexible model to work with. But if there are attributes here which make sense, you can save some time by picking these. So you can mix and match which ones are best for you, right? And so give a name. Again, we're going to pick the script that goes with it, and there's a few of them. And I want to pick the one that goes to PowerShell, right? And in this way, I'm going to build out a full map. And I think you kind of get the idea. And then there's going to be another field here, which is going to be our password, right? So again, this one's going to have a slightly different, take on it. Sorry. Yeah, it's just going to be attribute needs to be password. It's going to be right, and so on and so forth, and we'll build out the full map. So now, one of the things, the questions that often comes up is, can I extend the schema? And this is common. Like, let's say if you're looking at AD LDAP, and in traditional LDAP, companies that are using it, those schemas are often very customized. People have added all sorts of attributes to them to kind of support this centralized authentication directory that people can use. And so for us, it's really easy to adapt to it. So literally all you need to do is add the attribute that you need to add into this map, the rules for it, and that's it, and you're done. Okay, so you don't need to go through any kind of creating a new schema class or anything like that to be able to attribute. It's a very open-ended model, and literally, if you can type in the attribute name and have a rule for it, you can basically provision to it as long as the connector supports it. Okay, so if we were to look at a completed map, let's go back to the one that we had we're looking at earlier. Right, this is the one that's already been built out. So here we'll see, same account name, all the attributes that we want to be able to provision, okay, and all the rules that go with them. And at this point, if we, let's say this is done, and what we can do is we can, a user can basically, we can basically use this as is, or we can map this to a group or a role, right? So at this point, let's go ahead and test our to test this map, right? And we have our Windows instance open as well. So let's go to our user admin screen, and we can create a new user. Okay, and I'm going to go to classic view, and we'll cover this a little bit later. There's the difference between the template model versus the classic view. The classic view really is just a leftover from an earlier version of OpenIAM, which kind of lists out all the core fields, without you having to do any customization. It's still pretty convenient, when you're just getting started, that you don't have to do any extra configuration steps. But I think from a long-term perspective, the template view is much more desirable because you can limit your view to be, focus on the attributes that you care about, right? So let's say this user is going to be, test and this webinar, and it's March, 31, right? And we'll, pick some attributes here. We'll give it a default metadata type. We'll talk about the metadata types in a second, actually, when we look at the access control model. Now, in this case, I created a role already, and then we can use that, or we could have done this a little bit differently later on. Okay, and I'll show you how we could have done that as well. So in this case, I'm going to define a primary email address, which is going to be now we could have had that generated automatically, by the way, and just like we're leaving the login open here. So the idea is by leaving this open, the policy map will actually compute this value for us. And so I want to show you this working in AD, and then I want to show you what some of the policy maps look like. Okay. So now we're going to pick a supervisor. So we're going to pick this one. It's a completely garbage test user, but one of the things that you need to make sure when you pick your supervisors and creating these relationships in AD is that this supervisor must also exist in AD. And we need to have that identity in OpenIAM as well. So, what we synced last time and pulling in those users is one way to kind of build out the whole user profile. Right? So at this point, we've filled everything in. I've kind of disabled these notifications because I don't really want to send anything out right now. Okay. And at this point, the user the process has been started. We'll see that in a second. And we'll see that it's a pending create. This will get updated in a second. And so here, so I'm publishing everything to my people OU. And I'm just going to refresh this. And this is our user that we just created just now, that March. And if we open this up, we'll see the information that we passed in. We didn't set an address, so we don't expect one. That the username was calculated in the policy map, right? And then the other things are blank, right? So we only have, you know, and so right now we got a few attributes being published to manage a relationship is set. Now, if you notice in our AD structure, we have a finance, you know, OU and an IT and a sales department. And we really would like to have the user being created in the department that they belong to. But as you saw, like when we created this user, that there was no, we didn't pick a department, right? So let's modify this user. First of all, let's refresh the screen, and we can see if our user identity has updated. Right, so we see that the transaction is completed, and we saw that it was actually created on the AD side as well. And then at this point, let's go to user entitlements. And so in user entitlements, we see that they have an AD role, that the account's been created. We see a start date, which is when this account was created. Okay. And now if we go to organization, we see that that they're only part of the OpenIAM organization, right? So let's add over here, click on edit, say add, we'll add an organization. And at this point, let's say we want to put them into the sales department. Okay. So this is complete here. And if I look at the organization view, the sales department has been added. And now in my AD view, just keep in mind that this is the guy that's sitting over here in the people OU. If I refresh my screen, it should move, and it did. And if I look at my sales OU, it's been moved over to the right place, right? And when next time when we meet and we do our end-to-end joiners, movers, leavers process, we'll take a look at how, when we have data coming from a CSV file, that we can apply rules to be able to do this, all on the fly and be able to set this in one shot, right? Also, if we'd been using the template view, we could have just set the department, during user creation, right? It's not possible from here. So going a little bit deeper into this, let's take a look at our policy map. So we go back to manage system and we open this up. And let's take a look at how a couple of these things are behaving. So let's take a look at SAM account name, first of all. And we could so these are all Groovy scripts, right? So, and these are really out of the box. So we're defining some logic in here. And you'll see that the bulk of the work is done in this perform method. And there's a couple of things going on. So first is checking to see if the identity that it calculated, if it exists or not. And if it does, then we need to make sure that the SAM account name that we send is actually unique, right? That it can't already exist, right? So this is a method that's basically going to check within OpenIAM. It's basically making a call out to the service, over RabbitMQ to say, does this record exist or not? And if it does, then we will make it unique. And at that point, we have, some logic. So in the logic here is pretty simple. We're just basically incrementing the counter on that and ensuring the SAM account name doesn't exceed like the 20 character limit that AD has, right? So this is all, done over here. And similarly, if we look at our path attribute, which is what's controlling the OU, we can see a slightly different type of behavior. So in this case, this is looking up the department object And then from the department object, it's finding out what is the OU that's defined on that department object. And based on that, we're basically creating it in the appropriate, OU, right? So this moves the logic, like I said earlier, the connectors themselves shouldn't really know that much. So we're kind of keeping these things fairly general, right? And it's these rules which are kind of calculating these values. And the examples of these two scripts is to kind of give you an idea that you can really do whatever you want in them. You're not really restricted in any way, right? Now, people new to OpenIAM kind of get a little bit worried in that saying that, well, there's a lot of scripting to do. There's a fair amount. And yes, there is upfront, there is some scripting that you have to do, and it's flexible to handle fairly complex environments. And despite the fact that we now have a pretty significant customer base, we still see variations from customer to customer, and we need this flexibility to be able to adapt to those environments. IAM should never really dictate what a customer should do. It should really be, adapting to the customer environment, right? And so then that's really the driving factor behind all the flexibility that we have within OpenIAM. So the thing about the scripting and the number of scripts. So first of all, for your core applications, there are default scripts that come with OpenIAM, which you can use to modify. Second is, if you plan this out, you'll find that there are two buckets of scripts. There's one bucket, which are pretty much, they're common. So like things like how you determine, the identity naming, the basic attributes like your first name, last name, your departments. Those are all pretty common, and they'll carry over from connector to connector. So you won't have to keep recreating them. So if you have, 3 or 4 AD domains, then really, except for where there are variations, you won't have to keep creating these scripts again and again. Okay. The other part is that you can create the scripts here in OpenIAM in the Groovy editor that's there, and the editor has some capability where it will compile the scripts before you save them. So you won't be able to submit, any kind of, a script that will not compile, at least, right? And in the version that we're releasing in June, I think we're calling it it's version 4.2.2. The Groovy manager goes one step further, and it adds the ability to kind of define descriptions for each script, so filtering capabilities, and also there's a versioning engine that's built into that. So you can have versions of your scripts, you can roll back, and it will simplify how we move from one environment to another, right? But regardless, this should not become a monumental effort, if we kind of design things correctly and there is consistency across these applications. But there is a little bit of work that comes into this. Okay. So now that we've kind of looked at being able to create accounts, so let's take a step, go back to our PowerPoint, and let's look at some additional things that matter. So the question, there's a question being posted is, are scripts mapped outside of Docker? I mean, if I create or modify scripts and restart Docker, every modification is reverted to the base image. So the scripts are kept in the Docker volumes. They're part of the container. But I think you're worried about, like, if we do a if we do an upgrade, it's not going to overwrite those scripts. The upgrade process will take into account the fact that you have modifications, and it will not overwrite those scripts, right? But so they are in the file system, but they're wrapped inside a Docker volume, where it's, I think it's part of the Groovy manager container, which is there. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so a couple of things that we saw. Okay, so there's a question is, how do you manage the enforcement of attributes from OpenIAM to the target system? So the enforcement of the attributes, it's going to be through that policy map. So the policy map is going to dictate that the attributes which are required for your target system are in fact, being sent. If those attributes aren't available, then the transaction, will likely fail. So think about like we sent that request for AD, and let's say we left out the same account name. Well, without that, the transaction is going to fail, and we're going to return back a failure. Right? Is that what you mean, or do you have a different question in mind? Okay, so there's a few different things that we need to kind of move on to in terms of how these objects are kept, right? So in particular, the relationship between the identities and the accounts in OpenIAM versus and I think there's one more question here. Okay, so there's another question here. When you entered an email address for the new test you created earlier, how is OpenIAM going to send an email to the user that doesn't have an email in exchange yet? Okay, so the email address that I created just now is basically a test a test email account. It doesn't exist. There's no way to send anything to it. Okay, when we do this in practice, a customer may not always have their own Exchange server or a mail server, right? But if they do, then what we want to do is we want to be able to generate the email attribute as part of the account creation process, and set that value. But the distribution of that, OpenIAM should have its own SMTP account that it should be pointing to, and that's the account that will be used to be able to send that notification, right? But for them to receive it, obviously they do need to have a valid email account. Now, that becomes a little bit more interesting because in a workforce identity use case, think about a person walks in, a new hire comes into the company the first day, their account has been created. Most companies have a policy of not sending out emails to personal accounts, right? They don't want to distribute corporate information. So you may have to look at this a slightly different way, and that different way is that we can send a message to the hiring manager to say that new users going to be coming in, and these are their credentials, their temporary credentials, and hand it off to the user on the first day so that they can log into the network and set up their account. Right? There could be other ways as well. We can have like an account claim process where they can claim their account, but then the challenge becomes getting into your Windows or your Mac machine itself to be able to do that. Right? Okay. Going back to our main topic here. Okay, so there's another follow-up question that said, which is related to the enforcement, and says that I was referring to the update of values. For example, if I receive an update from HR, and if you configure OpenIAM as the master for information, so, same discussion from the synchronization process. If the attribute is modified on AD, can be replaced in the OpenIAM according. Okay, so this is about having data that's being changed, I think, in the target system outside of your IAM system. So let's say, for example, somebody goes in AD and moves the person to a different OU or a different group membership. So how do we kind of keep that in sync? How do we validate that? So if we just want to sync information back to OpenIAM, then the synchronization process works just perfectly fine for that. If we want to do a deeper validation, we want to enforce rules, then the reconciliation feature, which we're going to talk about, I think in not the next session, but the session after that, is what comes into play. So in the reconciliation, we can do things like we can compare data in two places, and we can then say, oh, what do I do? Do I accept this change that this person has made in the target system, or do I say restore it back to what it was? Or do I send out an alert, a report to someone, let them know that these changes occurred, that they should look at it? So there's a bunch of different things that we can do, but it's the reconciliation process that we should be looking at to kind of enforce that kind of that the data between the two systems is being maintained according to rules that we have. Okay, going back to our relationships. So we, during that user creation process, we saw that the test user had two identities or two accounts, one in OpenIAM and one in Active Directory. So there is a one-to-many relationship between a user and the identities. So, and simply a user profile can have n number of accounts or identities in various systems, right? So that is the relationship between these two objects. The other part is that sometimes people may have more than one account in that target system. So, like I said, you may have a admin, account or a privileged account and your normal account, and both of them need to coexist. And the way we kind of deal with that is there's one of two ways. One is we can, create a second managed system, which is for your admins. And so you can see the second account right there. Or we can create a separate privileged, user profile, which is a related account to the user. Sometimes the related account gives us more flexibility because we can see, all the systems that the privileged account has access to and the entitlements there, right? And it creates a very clean view of what we can do there. But now, again, two ways that we can do this. The other part is that the identity object itself can have its own attributes. So just like the user object has a number of attributes, we can also, have attributes on that object, right? And there's some predefined ones already in terms of, what the status is when the account was created, so on and so forth. But you can also have custom attributes that you define, on that account object itself. We talked a little bit about this already, so let's shift gears and look at the OpenIAM access control model. And this is kind of important when we, look at our next session where we want to be able to automate the whole life cycle. Okay, so the access control model is really made up of 4 objects. It's roles, groups, resources, and organizations. Roles, usually, well, we'll talk a little bit more about roles in a second. But all of these objects have some things in common. So first of all, we can use metadata type to be able to associate. So what a metadata type lets us do is that it allows us to kind of create like a virtual type. So let's say, for example, we're looking at groups. Well, groups is kind of a general object, but if we're, say, dealing with AD and we're dealing with, let's say we're looking at AWS, we're looking at Salesforce, they use different terms, right? They may not call them groups, they may call them something else. So in OpenIAM, we can create new metadata types. So we can say, this is an AD group, this is a profile object in Salesforce, or really any kind of entitlement that you see. And all of these objects allow you to create these virtual types. And so not only is it going to allow you to create a name that will help you easily identify what kind of object this is, but you can define the custom attributes that you need for each one of these systems to be able to more accurately represent that object. Right? So this gives us quite a bit of flexibility in terms of the kind of information that we can store with each of these objects. The second part is the inheritance capability. So roles, groups, resources, organizations all have the ability to kind of to inherit. It makes the most amount of sense to support inheritance on roles and groups. And with roles in particular, we can kind of abstract out entitlements to a base role and then inherit from it. So it makes the whole role modeling process a little bit cleaner, right? And resources are kind of like a general object in the access control model. We can use them to represent pretty much anything we want to. And inside OpenIAM, we already do that. So everything from a managed system to a URL, a field on a screen, can be modeled as a resource, right? So let's say you want to be able to support and down the road the request approval of say a laptop, right? So we can make the laptop a resource, and then we can insert that into our access control model, right? So it gives us a open-ended way of how we can kind of represent these. And the last one is the ability to kind of define attributes which control the permissions on an object, right? And again, these vary. So, a file system, it could be read, write, execute. In another system, like for example, if you're in banking, those permissions could be credit limits on an approval, on a loan, right? So they can be quite diverse in terms of how we represent these things. Okay, so focusing a little bit on roles. There are two types of roles. There are, and again, this is a very, high level generalization. So we have technical roles. Technical roles represent entitlements in an application. So, so let's say I'm looking at an Oracle database, and there are roles in them. So those could be Oracle roles, and those are technical roles. We can have business roles, which are basically a collection of entitlements in other applications, right? So you can say that I have a business role, which is called, sorry. So we can have a business role, which is, like say take a sales manager, and you can say, well, I have access to Salesforce, I have permissions within them. I get an AD account, a certain OU membership, a bunch of group memberships as well, right? So those can be, larger, blocks of access that we can give, right? Or you can even look at them as templates that we can kind of use to give people a collection of access, all in one shot, okay? So in practice, we find that companies often have a hybrid approach, right? It's very difficult to define a full role model for your entire corporation. It just requires, especially in larger corporations, it requires a tremendous amount of effort to be able to kind of work with the different departments, figure out what their roles are, especially for organizations which are not used to doing it. So generally what I tell people is that we should, we can do this in a iterative manner. So we can, define the roles that we know about, that we can be sure that these are current or accurate, model those, and over time we can keep creating new business roles as we discover them and be able to represent them, right? There's no reason to, to kind of delay the rollout of a project by spending, months or years trying to figure out what your RBAC model is, because by the time you figure it out, it will probably change due to organizational changes anyway. Okay. And to compensate for this, OpenIAM supports a direct entitlement model as well. So you can, have access which is based on a role, and then you can say, well, here's a direct entitlement to a group or things which are outside of that, right? So we can have this hybrid model, and it allows us to kind of adapt to like a real world scenario. Okay. So let's look at this. Yeah, we can. Let's shift over to our example here, right? And let's go ahead and create a new role. So again, it's back in the web console. I go to role. And so let's say that I'm going to create a new role called, now, again, here we're going to ask you between access role and these two options here. They both do the same thing. This is just for a classification. So if we're developing roles which are really going to control SSO and they're kind of focused just on that, we could call that an access role. If we want to be able to provision, we can call it a provision role. The system's flexible. You can create your own new names, which are going to be more intuitive for your users. So let's say I'm going to create a new user, right? And let's say I'm going to create a role called let's say it's an accounts payable. And we're going to pick the application that it goes with. So in this case, it's going to be AD PowerShell. Now, this was designed here to be convenient if you're only going to be able to integrating with one application. There is the role entitlement screen where I can add additional applications and model them out if I want to, right? The rest of the screen, it's not really that important right now. So things like, the max number of users, the duration. If I want to inherit, then I can pick a parent, for the role. I can, pick where I'm going to inherit. And so that's an option. But for now, I think we can just create this role. So the role definition has been created. And then we can go to role entitlements. And we'll see that AD has already been added here, right? But I can also say add, and I can add added, I could have picked another application to add as well. So maybe it was like Linux server and Oracle server that I wanted to add. I can just pick that if I want to. In this case, I want to add another group membership to this. And again, I'm going to go for my AD PowerShell instance. And, let's say that this is the finance group that I need to be part of, right? And this could be much more extensive in terms of what I define here. So now that the role has been defined, in my user creation process, just like we did earlier with the AD role that we created, we can go ahead and create that new user, and we'll see this role showing up over here. Okay. So again, let's go back to our template view, our classic view, right? And we can fill this out, as we did earlier, right? So, and we'll just keep these default values. And here, so our accounts payable role, right, that we just created. And in this case, again, we're going to use a now in a follow-up to the question I was asked earlier, on these email addresses, we, and this is what we'll show when we kind of do the automatic lifecycle management, is we don't need to define the email address. We will generate the email address and create the mailbox, as part of this, right? Okay, and these options here are really for admins to be able to send out notifications, right? So again, so this is on its way and should have gotten created. And that's really it in terms of the basics. When we do our session next time, when we'll take a deeper look at the automatic lifecycle management, we'll also take a look at how we can do group assignments, and how we can control the various attributes that we need beyond this, right? So there's a question that says, when you create a user with OpenIAM and it's showed in AD, how does the new user log in since no password was entered? So it's a good question, and this kind of goes out to how we want to roll this out, right? So the default model here is that OpenIAM is going to generate a randomized password that conforms to your AD policy, and obviously now it's only stored within OpenIAM, right? So we can either distribute that temporary password to the manager when they come in, or we could also give them an activation link. Now, the activation link, only works if you're already on the network. So if you're working from home and you're going to get this thing to your private email, then you can get an activation link, or you can get that randomized password, and you can the system will force you to change it next time, right? So there, those are two ways. But yeah, it's a good question. We're not entering the password there. Now, that being said, if I was an admin and I wanted to reset this person's account, then I can reset this, and I can say I can fill out password manually, and I can put in a new password if I want to, and or I can say auto generate, right? and it will send it out, right? It's gonna do an email notification. But I think really, I mean, we can just send out a link and then it will, allow the user to go do their part at that point, right? So a couple of different ways that we can do this. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, again, thank you very much for joining. I think we kind of covered our objective for today, and we'll go a little bit deeper next time. Thanks everybody for making the time for this.